what role does engineering ethics play in protecting public welfare and safety, and how can engineers prioritize these concerns? Because to me, that's of the utmost importance.
So it is kind of unique for engineers as compared to other professions. You can think of a doctor who has kind of a captured audience. He's got a definite duty. He's got a definite ethical duty to protect his client, to protect his patient. That is very, it's one person that he's dealing with.
Engineering ethics is a vital component of the engineering profession, and it's essential to understand its importance in maintaining safety, integrity, and public trust. As civil engineers, we have a significant impact on people's lives, and our actions can have far-reaching consequences. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have with me Ted Thomson. Ted's a licensed professional engineer. He is the Geotechnical Division Manager at Pannoni. And we're going to explore the vital role of ethics in engineering, how ethical considerations can shape our designs, influence our project outcomes, and foster collaboration within our society. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering Podcast. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Ted Thomson is a licensed professional engineer. He's also the Geotechnical Division Manager at Pannoni. Ted, welcome to the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
No, happy to have you and happy to dive in here. So, Ted, maybe you can start by telling our audience a little bit about kind of yourself, your background, and kind of what took you to become the Geotechnical Division Manager at Pannoni.
Sure. Like you said, my name is Ted Thomson. I practice at Pannoni Associates. We're a company. I'm based in Delaware. Our company has about 15 offices throughout the East Coast. I've been with Pannoni for about 15 years now. I was with another engineering company before Pannoni for about the same length of time. So I'm going on 30 years of experience about. Geotechnical Division Manager or was really an ongoing thing. It wasn't a specific choice when I started out. I wouldn't really say that when I started out in engineering, I saw myself sitting in the division manager spot, but it's kind of a natural progression to go. You come on as an entry-level engineer, you do a lot of field work, you do a lot of construction testing, you move into a project engineer, you move into a project manager, and then you start managing folks. And, depending on what your interests are, the next step for that is to get a group under you. And that's where I ended up. That's where I am currently.
That's great. That's great. So we're going to talk today about engineering ethics. And I want to start by asking you how you define engineering ethics and what unique ethical responsibilities do engineers have maybe compared to other professionals?
That is a great question. Ethics is really hard to define. It's not something that you can fit in a nice box. It's got nice corners and is very well defined. It's easy to say in an abstract manner that engineering ethics is doing the right thing all the time. Even when no one is watching.
Right.
That's an easy one. That's an easy definition. You could also say that's a definition of integrity, but the two are very closely related. So that's very abstract. However, we do need to, as a profession, for no other reason than to be able to have something that's enforceable in the laws, you kind of do have to put it into a little bit more narrow of a box. So what the professions have done, what the engineering societies, what the professional engineering boards have done is to kind of come up with what are called canons for ethical behavior of engineers. Usually in this country, there are 6 canons that define what ethical behavior is. I'm just going to read them. I have the NSPE website up in front of me just so I can read them and get them right. I pretty much have them committed to memory, but just want to make sure I get them right. The first canon is to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. And then it says perform services only in the areas of your competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act for each employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee, avoid deceptive acts, and conduct yourselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. So that is the engineers trying to put ethics into something that is enforceable.
And as an engineer, I love it because I have some steps that I can follow and it's not too abstract for me and I can kind of wrap my head around it. But no, it is, being a licensed professional engineer myself, I do know how important it is. And I guess the kind of the follow-up question would be, what role does engineering ethics play in protecting public welfare and safety? And how can engineers prioritize these concerns? Because to me, that's of the utmost importance.
So it is kind of unique for engineers as compared to other professions. You can think of a doctor who has kind of a captured audience. He's got a definite duty. He's got a definite ethical duty to protect his client, to protect his patient. That is very, it's one person that he's dealing with. In the engineering realm, you're dealing with a community, you're dealing with a state, you're dealing with society. What we create, what we design, what we construct affects multitudes of people. So being able to act and, perform your services ethically is really paramount to make sure that the first code, the health, safety, and welfare of the public is maintained. There are a lot of examples, the drinking water issue in Flint, Michigan,
Yes.
which represents an ethical kind of dilemma where some folks fell down and that resulted in a big issue for the public, health. There's cases like what happened in Florida with the condominium association, the condo building that fell down. That was about a year and a half ago, something like that. Inspection reports weren't followed, things like that. So that's an example of why it is important to be ethical and to follow through on, what your tasks are and responsibilities as an engineer.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing and the reason that we wanted to do this episode with Ted and put a highlight on ethics is because it's not like a lot of other jobs where, if you make a mistake, it's kind of no big deal. That's not the case as an engineer, because if you make a mistake, it can be a very big deal and it can impact many, many lives. And that's why the engineering ethics is such an important thing that we have to think about as part of our job. And listen, if you do your job right, theoretically, you're going to be okay because you're going to spend your time, you're going to focus, you're going to do the calculations, do your checks, etc. But a lot of things come into play in engineering and construction projects and things happen. I mean, it is what it is. There's a lot of money involved. There's schedules involved. There's policies involved. So it's something that we need to be very aware of. And Ted, I'm wondering what inspired you to make engineering ethics a focus in your career, and what do you see as its kind of role in shaping the engineering profession, even today as we move forward?
So what inspired me, I guess, when I first started, the first company that I came on with in Delaware, the owner of that company and the principals of that company were very, very strong, very strong in ethical behavior, doing the right thing. I was truly blessed to be able to get in with that company and learn from those folks. They truly taught what was right from wrong, what the consequences were of doing the wrong thing, and that was really enforced. As I moved on in my career and joined the DAPE, here it is, DAPE shirt. As I joined that and got involved with the Law Enforcement and Ethics Committee, that case considers a lot of complaints, some of which are ethical in nature, all different complaints against the engineering community. I was able to see, what is unethical behavior, what is ethical behavior, what are the consequences of doing that, and on a national scale, DAPE, it doesn't report up, but it is part of a larger organization called National Society for Examiners in Engineering, NCEES.
Yes.
And you get to see things on a national level there of what folks are doing across the country and how behaviors slip and you also get a good exposure to ethical behavior and what is really great examples of engineers going above and beyond.
Yeah, and for those of you not familiar with DAP, it stands for the Delaware Association of
Thank you.
Professional
Yep.
Engineers.
Yes. Yep.
Just to be clear on that, but yeah, and Ted makes a really good point in that a lot of engineering colleges and universities with the ABET accredited curriculum does have an engineering ethics course, but again, that's kind of the limitation a lot of times of what you know coming into the industry, and it's a great primer to understand what ethics is, but the reality of it is that companies and organizations, I think both public and private sector, need to do, maybe I don't want to say a better job because I don't want to stereotype. I think some companies probably do it well, but you need to educate the new engineers, the recent graduates on ethics, what it means, kind of exactly what Ted's saying, what he just described here would be great for people to hear that, because I think a lot of times we get right into design, projects, specs, the technical stuff, and we don't like think about that bigger picture.
You only know as a new engineer coming out of school, getting your first job, you can only get educated, you can only learn based on what you're exposed to. So, and there is a wide gamut of things, not to necessarily put any one person or company down, but there is a wide gamut of the types of companies that there are. Some companies go after lots and lots of projects. They are, commodity driven. Some firms are what's called boutique firms. They only go after a few projects, and they like to get bigger. They like to get bigger profit margins that way. How you execute a project, what drives you, how you do calcs, how you report to the client, how you report to other engineers, that's all learned behavior. And it's extremely important to have someone with, that high moral, that high ethical character to get you off on the right foot.
Yeah, 100%. You don't know what you don't know, essentially. And,
Exactly, yeah.
Your company, a mentor, an association, these are all avenues for knowledge for younger engineers and recent graduates. So, Ted, we've been talking kind of, big picture on ethics. Can you maybe describe some of the most common ethical issues that engineers encounter, especially with multidisciplinary projects, which I know you're familiar with?
So there are an engineer's interface with the public is one area where you see some questionable ethical discussions or dilemmas. An engineer can go to a site and very flippantly have a question from a client saying, is this stormwater an issue on my site? And the engineer very flippantly saying, nah, this will be fine, without having done the due diligence to come up with that conclusion. That's an ethical dilemma, right? Because the client doesn't understand what the engineer understands. And him saying this isn't an issue, that's not what, that doesn't mean the same thing as what he means it to, is what the client is understanding. So you see that a lot. You see
I have
yeah,
one, Ted,
yeah.
that I want to mention that I've heard a lot. I practice site engineering. Ted, geotechnical. I was explaining to Ted before we talked that my wife's a geotechnical, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And if I come onto a site as a site engineer, and let's say I'm going to inspect the parking lot or the curb or something, and there's an open excavation there that the geotech's responsible for inspecting, and it's completely open and there's no shoring and it's unsafe. If I see it and I don't say anything about it and something happens, I could be in trouble for that. Even though it wasn't what I was there for, and I'm a civil engineer, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, my company's not doing it, I can be held liable for that potentially. So I think you just need to understand that as a license holder, or as a PE, when you're doing things, if you see something, you have to kind of report. You're like Ted read through the canons before. There's certain levels of responsibility. So I don't want to go down all the rabbit holes today, but my point being is that, we do have responsibilities with your license. And I think sometimes engineers get their license and they're excited. I can sign and seal plans now, and it's great. But I always say, I go back to the old Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. And that goes for your engineering license.
That's great. That's and what you brought up is a very overt example, right, Anthony, of an open excavation and public safety being, or at least the contractors on the site being liable for that potentially. There are other examples that are not so overt. You can be out there testing compaction of soils, testing concrete, and the results not quite meet what the specs say, and the contractor is pressuring you to say, look, just say it's okay. We're under a time crunch. We're under this. We've got to get this done. Look, it's okay. It'll be fine.
It's close enough.
That's another ethical dilemma. And
Yeah.
our young engineers, because they are the ones out in the field, they run into that a lot. That's where, say willpower for lack of a better word, but that's where sticking to your guns and knowing what's right and being able to say, no, this is wrong, you've got to do it this way, that's where that comes into importance.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because a lot of times you do have younger engineers that are doing the site inspection work, and you have a bunch of contractors and laborers that have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, standing in a circle around this engineer saying, it's close enough, it's fine, we got to keep going, this is a big budget. And it's really hard for an engineer to say, no, I got to call the office, I got to double check this. And that's a problem. And again, I think that's where it goes back to education and building up the confidence of younger professionals in any way that we can. And it's still going to be hard because it just is what it is. But any kind of shadowing, mentoring you can do in your organizations, building up confidence for your professionals can maybe help them with that. And I think also educating them on the risks, like Ted and I talked about earlier, which is really the health and safety of people, the biggest risk. And also there's huge liability risks for your organization. So while the contractor, for example, may push on this engineer to push things through, if something does happen, not only could this engineer be in trouble, their company is going to be in a lot of trouble. And maybe if they thought about that, it helped them a little bit more in that tough situation. It's all education. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think we need to talk more about it.
Definitely. It is, of course, we're biased, but I think that we have one of the greatest professions in the world. We are no less useful or important than a doctor is. We save lives, we fix problems not only for our generation, but future generations. I think that we have the greatest profession in the world. It's important for us to take pride in that.
Yeah, I agree. My kids always used to ask me, what does a civil engineer do? And I would say, look out the window. Find something, a road, a bridge, traffic light, building. But no, I agree with that. So Ted, let's talk about managing multidisciplinary projects. And when you get involved with projects like that, where there are many different factors involved, how do you ensure that all the team members uphold a high standard of ethics, especially when you're faced again with these project pressures and just so many different stakeholders?
So that is that's a situation where you have a lot of different moving parts. You have a lot of people interfacing with other people, a lot of decisions going on at once, and the potential for someone to cut a corner, not even consciously, but subconsciously or what have you, that's a really great risk, just in the matter of time and the matter of overseeing things. It's important to have a good team. All right. It's important to have a team that is comfortable with talking to each other. So, one extreme is you can have a project that goes death by meetings because you have too many meetings. But it's important to get the folks together, to have them talk to each other, to have them be comfortable talking to each other. I think that's what it always comes down to communication, right?
Yeah.
If the lines of communication are open and people are comfortable being able to talk to each other, that sets you up for a successful project.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about some examples here, but I want to dive a little bit deeper, and I want to try to offer some guidance to our listeners about handling ethical conflicts, especially when they're kind of balancing or trying to balance client interests, of course, and public safety. And one example that I can give, and Ted can certainly add on to this or share other examples, but if you're in a situation like we talked about where you have a contractor, and I'm not picking on contractors, but it's just an easy way to do this because those are the people we interact with the most. If you have a contractor and they're trying to push something through, like we suggested, but you really need to give it some more thought and some more investigation, at least that's the right thing to do, and they're trying to get you to sign off on it. I think one of the things that you can do is contact your client directly and say, Ted, listen, I'm here with the contractor on site. Readings aren't where they're supposed to be. The contractor's looking for me to push it through, but I don't think it's in the best interest of you or us to push it through, because if something happens down the road, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I'm asking you to, or I'm telling you, I'd like to call the office and have them run a couple checks. It might take us an extra 24 hours or so, but I think it's in your best interest. And if you have a good client relationship, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yeah, run the calculations. I certainly don't want to put myself in that kind of a risk and that kind of a situation. But the reason I use that example is because I think bringing the client in and letting them know that they're at risk just as much as we are is a good way to take the pressure off the engineer in that situation. So that's an example that I always use, Ted. I don't know if you want to add to that or have any other ideas, but.
No, definitely. It is not all on one person's shoulder. The person who is out in the field, who is seeing the construction go on, I'll use them as an example because they're front line. The easy out, and what we like to tell our entry level engineers is, look, it's your out is to say, look, I just have to call the office. I got to get in touch with my engineer, and he's got to take a look at it. All right. They're not taking the risk. All right. They are putting the risk back on the managers in the office. That's a good way that they can diffuse a situation and get everybody off of their back. You say, look, this is something that I have to check up on. We're required. It's what we do as a procedure in our company, and I just have to check in. All right. It will still be tough, and you'll get some clients that you do that you say, hey, I have to do this. I've got to take this time. And the clients will huff and puff, and that will be an uncomfortable situation. In the long run, though, at the end of the day, I think that 99% of the time, those clients come back and they say, look, you were looking out for me. And when when you stick to your guns and you say, look, I understand that we're in this predicament. We've got this deadline to meet, whatever, but this is really important that we check this. In the heat of the moment, they're going to be upset. They'll get over it. And at the end of the day, they're going to appreciate you that much more. And you will shine that much more because you will have shown that you have integrity and ethics.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think that's really great. And I think a couple things about what Ted just said there. One of them is it is a great way to take the pressure off of you by just saying, hey, I got to call our procedure is to call the office. I can't make the call here. So I got to make a call to them, right? You're kind of like removing yourself a little bit from the situation. But I think that last part too, it's all about trying to make sure that you're covering all your bases. Like that's what we need to do as engineers, because if we leave one thing to chance, something really bad can happen. And I think that that's something for us that's important. And I think the other part about what Ted said is this is a relationship business. Most of the firms from the private side in the civil engineering world do 85 to 90% repeat work. So building the relationships and being able to have the conversations like Ted just suggested is only going to show the client that you're looking out for their best interests, and it's going to build a more positive relationship with them and hopefully a longer term relationship with them. So, in the beginning, it's going to be tough, some of these conversations, but as you get to know that client, you're going to say, hey, listen, Ted, we've been working together a long time. I'm not going to do anything that's not in your best interest. We need to take a look at these calculations again, right? And so that's really what you want to do, is build those relationships with your clients as civil engineers so that you can have a good long-term relationship and they know that you're looking out for them. Ultimately, that's what they want to know. And I guess, Ted, one other question that I would ask around ethics is, for those civil engineers listening that want to just learn more about ethics for themselves, how would you recommend that they do that?
When I saw the question of how do you define engineering ethics, and of course I think of the engineering laws, but I was thinking, geez, that's a good question. How do I do that? Googled what is engineering ethics. There are a host of There is a host of information out there
That's great.
on published papers, whatnot, talks, seminars, published papers on what is engineering ethics. There is courses that deal specifically with that. I don't mean there's university
Webinars and
courses,
such.
but there's also online seminars and whatnot. In fact, we refer folks as part of the penalties, if you will, where there is an ethical violation. We make people take 30 hours of engineering ethics PDHs, and there's a course that we always refer them to. Now, you could do that on your own. That's great. It's a great way to learn about it. There's online forums where you don't have to say who you are or what the specific project is, but you can ask a question and you'll get answers from other professionals throughout the industry. That's a good, independent, objective. You don't have to identify who you are. That's a good way of getting more information.
That's great. That's great. All right. So all good stuff there. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and wrap up with Ted, and we're going to put him on the civil engineering career hot seat. We'll be right back. All right, I'm back with my guest for today, Ted Thomson, who is the Geotechnical Division Manager at Pannoni. Ted, of course, is also a licensed professional engineer. And Ted, it's time for the civil engineering career hot seat. You ready?
Ready. Let's go.
All right. So do you have any specific rituals that you practice every day? For example, whether it be a morning routine or a lunchtime routine, or just something that you do consistently on a daily basis that has contributed to your success?
This is completely outside the realm of engineering, but I will say that every day I get up at 4:30 a.m. and I go do CrossFit. I am an avid CrossFitter. I'm such an avid CrossFitter that I bought a CrossFit gym. But that helps clear my mind. And the folks that I interact with there help clear my mind. And listening to the coaches there, even though I am the age that I am and they're all 20-some, it helps. It helps to hear the rah-rah speeches because it's all good stuff. I look at stuff online, the Leadership Development Institute on Facebook, and they're just quotes. They're just little 1-2 sentence quotes, but it helps to keep things forefront in your mind on what's important, why you're doing this, what integrity, how important that is. I like to read those things. And I'm a big history buff, too. I love Winston Churchill. He's like the greatest orator in the world.
That's great. That's great. No, I love that. And I love outlets like, for example, a CrossFit where you have a community of people that you can build relationships with outside of work. Again, it could be a gym, it could be your church, it could be an athletic team, definitely. It could be anything. But I think having outlets like that for working professionals is important to get yourself out of work for a little bit and connect with other people. So that's great. All right. The next question I have for you is, do you have, whether it was a book or an author or a framework or a video or something, or a class, just something that you found that was helpful, that kind of stuck with you when it comes to professional or personal development?
Like I said, I'm a big history buff, so reading about history is a great thing. Winston Churchill, big fan of Winston Churchill. Since you asked that question, as far as the book goes, I'm not a big reader, but there's this book, How Bad Do You Want It? It's by Matt Fitzgerald. I got into this when I first got into CrossFit and decided to become super competitive at it. And I thought I was going to go to the games and do all of this. So I started reading this type of stuff. That book there is designed around athletic performance. But the lessons there, you can extrapolate out to the professional world as well. It's about being disciplined. It's about, prioritizing what is important and what's not important. Reading that and rereading that helps prioritize and keep what's important in the forefront of your mind.
That's great. Yeah. A colleague of mine just recommended a book to me called Chop Wood, Carry Water. Falling in love with the process of becoming great. And it's basically like, to your point, developing really good habits, which sometimes are like the hard things to do, right? Not the glamorous things to do, so to speak, but those are the things that make you successful in the long term, like doing those things every day over and over. And so I think there's a lot of value to that approach to your career and life, really. All right. So Ted, thinking back on some of your managers through your career, you don't have to name names specifically, but if you think of your favorite manager or managers, I'm wondering what made them your favorite. We're trying to understand what are some of the characteristics of great managers and leaders in kind of our civil engineering world.
Go back to the first company that I was in. The CEO there, the owner, the founder there, and then my manager. They were all great mentors. They were all very all personable. All had different styles,
Right.
but very personable. There were some folks there who would, if you did something wrong, they would, I wouldn't say baby you, but they had a way of telling you professionally so that you weren't overwhelmed. There were others there that would hit you on the head with it. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. For me personally, that's what works. I don't want sugar coated. I want to be hit in the head with it. But some of those things, their personality, how personable they were, how easily they were to get along with, how you weren't worried about being truthful with them because you weren't going to get punished for being truthful, for saying what you thought.
That's great. No, I love that personal touch, the ability to feel like you could just connect with that person and have a conversation whenever you need to about anything, I think is such an important aspect of the kind of the manager team member dynamic, if you will. All right. So I got one final question for you, Ted. We call it the civil engineering career elevator advice question. If you were to get into an elevator with an up and coming civil engineer and you had about 30 to 40 seconds with him or her, what career advice would you share?
I would tell them to get involved in a professional society. It's easy to join an ASCE. As a young engineer, you're with your peers. You're not with folks that are clients and other things that are a little bit more intimidating. You're with your peers. Get used to that. It helps you communicate. It helps you make lifelong business and personal friends, that you'll have throughout your career, throughout your life. Get involved with organizations. That's probably the single most biggest thing, is to get involved.
That's great. Well, Ted, you've given us a lot of great things to think about between both engineering ethics and some of your kind of career lessons that you've learned here. I want to just thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us on the Civil Engineering Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Very much enjoy it. Thank you, Anthony.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ted. Engineering ethics is such an important topic that a lot of engineers are not as familiar with as they should be, and I hope that this episode educated you on this important topic. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.